Ted Cruz is the bad joke that just keeps writing itself. He's rightfully in hot water for whisking his family away to Cancun to be warm, while the people in his state, the state he represents, froze during this unprecedented and deadly Arctic storm that crippled both the power and water infrastructure in Texas. Now, Cruz blamed his 10 and 12-year-old daughters for the trip of epically bad optics and political privilege, but we find out that it's not his kids who are to blame for this mess. And honestly, what a despicable cretin he is to put this on his kids in the first place. But the other villain in this little tragic comedy of political callousness is actually his wife, Heidi. Someone who really hates the Cruzes gave the New York Times text messages sent by Heidi Cruz to the family's friends and neighbors, inviting them to join them on their last-minute junket to the Ritz-Carlton in Cancun, $300 a night with good security, she said, because their house was freezing. Quote, anyone can or want to leave for the week, we may go to Cancun. She texted info to the neighbors about a direct flight and hotels with capacity, seriously, in the invitation. But when nobody responded, because, maybe they have some morals and a soul, Mrs. Cruz texted again with a little more reasonable sounding offer saying, we have gas, stove, so at least we can heat water, the little that there is, happy to help anyone we can too. Still, nobody responded, and the Cruzes left for Cancun, their little getaway to escape the freeze in Texas, which Ted Cruz said was done because parents wanted to appease their two young daughters. He wanted to be a good dad. Meanwhile, people in Texas were searching in the freezing cold for felled trees, for firewood. Pipes burst from the cold, creating cascades of ice. People employed risky methods just to stay warm, creating all kinds of dangerous conditions, from carbon monoxide poisoning to house fires. And to date, at least 47 people have died as a result of the Arctic storm, many freezing to death, others dying from accidents encountered trying to navigate the treacherous, icy conditions. And as the lights have now come back on in most places in Texas, millions are still without water. And I can't help but compare the colossal failure of Texas politicians to prepare their energy infrastructure for just this kind of worst case scenario to the colossal failure of Flint, Michigan politicians who switched the city's water supply from the Detroit Water and Sewerage Authority to the Flint River as a temporary water source before moving to the Karen Gandhi Water Authority to save money. In both cases, politicians were warned of the consequences of not having a properly maintained and modernized public utility infrastructure, not being prepared to respond adequately to emergencies, and for having a flat-footed and even calloused response to the dire impacts on citizens' lives that their bad political decisions caused. Different reasons for the separate disasters, certainly, but the underlying causes are the same. Crumbling utility infrastructure, not suited to meet the people's needs, politicians and corporations trying to make money off of power and water and cutting corners to do it, and people left without the basic necessities of life, and hundreds end up dying because of it. Unlike Flint, I hope it doesn't take years to hold somebody accountable for what happened in Texas. Firing Ted Cruz would certainly be a good start. Sadly, I don't think he's up for re-election until 2024. Now, we talk quite a bit here on By Any Means Necessary about international issues, and that's not by accident. It's not just because that's the show's mission to address and connect issues of U.S. imperialism and the ravages of capitalism domestically and abroad, connecting the world around us. But we do this also because this is our personal ideological stance, since internationalism is at the foundation of our views. And we get that from many of our ancestors and revolutionary role models, but one in particular stands out today, and he is W.E.B. Du Bois. Why? because he hosted the first Pan-African Congress in Paris, France, on this day in 1919. It was held alongside the Paris Peace Conference, which was convened to create a lasting peace following World War I. The Pan-African Congress was held 2 decades after the first Pan-African Conference was held in 1900, which attempted to secure a peace for people of African descent within the New World Order after the war. Now, the Library of Congress blog notes that W.E.B. Du Bois traveled to France in December 1918 as a representative of the NAACP, confident that the Paris Peace Conference provided the ideal setting for a parallel gathering of Black dignitaries from around the world to discuss the international problem of racism. But few African representatives could attend because colonial governments refused to allow them passage to Paris. And many African Americans similarly were denied passage by the U.S. government. But still, Du Bois and 56 other participants from 15 nations who could attend the gathering in Paris marks the more formalized international effort of defining and implementing Black internationalism. 3 more congresses would take place in the 1920s, followed in 1945 by a Pan-African Congress held in Manchester, England, attended by Kwame Nkrumah, who would become the Prime Minister and President of Ghana, and Jomo Kenyatta, who would become Prime Minister and President of Kenya, as well as West Indian Marxist George Padmore. So when we talk on this show and in our individual organizing efforts today about domestic policy rooted in capitalism and the ravages on the working class, poor, and oppressed, especially Black people here in the U.S., and we connect them to the imperialism and neocolonialism of U.S. foreign policy and how that affects the same people around the world, we do this because we were taught these connections by our revolutionary father, W.E.B. Du Bois. But just like in 1919, Black internationalism is still a dangerous prospect for this capitalist empire. We are dangerous to it, and we fully embrace that. Follow Luqman Nation on patreon.com/Luqman Nation for lots of great content.